Hey everyone, welcome back to Here in Apologetics. Really pumped you're joining us today. Today we're going to be doing a brief response to Rationality Rules, where I think he's wrong about the state of apologetics. He released this video that should be linked down below a few months ago called How My Views Have Changed in the Past 5 Years. And it's a really great video, and you can kind of look at Steve's thoughts and see how his ideas have changed. And I wanted to respond to the little blurb on apologetics for a couple reasons. One, I think it's very intellectually rigorous. I really appreciate Steve's commitment to truth and engaging with the best and kind of showing that like like anyone else, like there's a lot we have to learn. And I basically agree with Steve on some points. And then he's also going to talk about things such as like the best argument for God in his mind, and which is going to be interesting here. We're going to talk about intelligent design and Darwin. And then he at the end talks about the problem of divine hiddenness, which is interesting considering the context of the rest of the video. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a short video. And if you're here joining us live, well, shout out to you because it's 8 a.m. where I'm doing this. And oh my gosh, it's just, I'm tired, but it's going to be a lot of fun. I love doing this. So I have wide awake and full of energy to do this video. Ismail, good to see you. Good morning to you. Let's get in. So we're going to play this first little clip and get this thing started. The audio should be shared, but if you can't hear the audio for some reason, just let me know. But that should not be a problem.
Since my early teens, I've recognized the face of religion as arrogance disguised as humility, hate disguised as love, and a lobotomy disguised as wisdom. But I always suspected that by reading enough historical and contemporary literature and engaging in enough conversation, I'd come to recognize that behind the face is an intellectually rigorous foundation. After all, I reasoned, so many wonderfully intelligent people believe in a God, and there's entire courses and degrees dedicated to theology and apologetics. Whilst it might be the case that I'll never be personally convinced of theism, upon a day I'll surely appreciate that there's at least sufficient intellectual support for the proposition, and that given a sprinkle of divine revelation or personal experience, there's a considerable probability that it's true, that a God exists.
So I want to pause here and just say like big shout out to Steve with like how he's framing this thing because like I basically could agree with him, except I'm a Christian, so I could say the same thing about like atheism. Like as I've done like these videos and whatnot, I've been very impressed by like atheism and formidable forms of atheism, and I'm probably more confident than ever that God exists. But I've had a deeper and deeper appreciation for different kinds of atheism just through working and doing stuff like this and making response videos and listening and things like this. So that's all I wanted to say. And the other thing is, Steve, if you're listening, you are extremely poetic, my guy. Like, in addition to doing your YouTube channel, you should write like poem books or something because I just love your flow. It's just beautiful. So yeah, I just basically wanted to say I agree with Steve here. And I could say as a theist, looking at the atheist side, I could basically just copy what Steve said and said that's the truth about atheism. But yeah, let's get into the next bit.
You know, similar to how we think of the multiverse today, there's a fair chance that it exists, but there's also a fair chance that it doesn't. There's good reason both for and against the proposition. Now, given the direction that my life took, I've been gifted with the wonderful opportunity of digesting a significant amount of theological content, from the historical words of Aquinas, Al-Ghazali, Paley, and Pascal to the contemporary words of Lewis, Craig, and Plantinga. And yet, to my surprise, I'm now less convinced of the existence of a God than I have ever been. To be clear, the more I learn, the more I'm overwhelmed by what little I know. Each book, each lesson smashes my ego, and for this I'm very grateful. Most of my views have consequently weakened or indeed been shattered, but a minority of my views have only solidified, and one such view is that the various arguments for the existence of God, and especially the way in which they've developed in response to scientific and philosophical, that the various arguments...
All right, we're going to pause there for a second before he gets into his interesting arguments. Hubsinger says you're giving him way too many compliments. Well, Steve's amazing, so of course I'm going to give him compliments. And like the beard, and there's so many good things. I love Steve. He's a really cool guy, even though we've never actually talked, but he seems cool. So again, like I'm gonna mostly agree with him here because this isn't like the meat of this section. Like, yeah, I agree. And like thinking about like atheism, there's a very rigorous foundation here. And if you read the works of people like Oppie or Sobel or Mackey, like there's a very rich foundation for atheism too. And this debate isn't between like one side just being chiefs of rationality and the other side just being irrational and blind. Like that's not how this Christian atheist debate works. And like if you're concerned about like Romans 1 or something, like I don't think there's a problem with Christian theology. Like there's a really good analogy with how, like at least how I think about Romans 1 and like things like that in The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. So you can check that out if you're curious. There's a really great, Lewis lays it out pretty well. So once again, basically I agree with him in Steve's personal journey. So like if he doesn't find the arguments like interesting or not interesting, but like powerful, well, like I think justification's person based. And if it's in Steve's eyes, they're not powerful, then like, yeah, what are you going to do? I can't force someone to accept certain arguments. So yeah, I mean, I agree, and he's super poetic. And now we're gonna get into the juicy stuff, where Steve's gonna talk about his favorite argument in Darwin and intelligent design, and this will be fun.
Arguments for the existence of God, and especially the way in which they've developed in response to scientific and philosophical objection, are precisely as good as we'd expect them to be in a state in which there is no God. They're quite frankly awful. For me, the most convincing argument by far is Paley's watchmaker. The sheer complexity of our biology, the way in which, for instance, our system sends platelets to seal a wound, is an intuitively very convincing argument that we're the product of intelligent design. At least it was to me. But even a rudimentary understanding of evolution by natural selection completely neutralizes it. Like a pin to a balloon, Darwin popped teleology.
Okay, so before we get into Wesley, wow, you see where my brain's at. Before we get into Steve and intelligent design, I want to say, Wesley, I don't know what's worse, you being on the stream during your calculus class or having a calculus class at 8:05 in the morning. Oh gosh, it's good to see you, Wesley. So let's talk about this. So Steve's talking about his favorite argument, or like the one that was most powerful in his mind, and he talks about like the watchmaker analogy with Paley, and like, okay, that's fine. Like, I don't really like. Once again, like it's his personal take on things. But then he goes on to say that like evolutionary theory and Darwin just destroys intelligent design, and I just want to say like, yeah, that's probably not the case. Plug, see my interview with Dr. Zachary Adern on this. We literally just talked about like, is evolution evidence of design, or how evolution could be evidence of design. He talked about 3 different lines. So we talked about like convergence, and all kinds of fun stuff. So I really encourage you to check that out. So here's some reasons to think that this just isn't true, that Darwin, like evolutionary theory, just trumps design. Well, some theories of evolution are going to require design. Like if you go with a pure Darwinian model where the only factors are like chance and random chance and, oh gosh, I just blanked. But if you go with a pure Darwinian theory, well, then maybe they wouldn't need to be designed. There's a lot of other theories of evolution, and a lot of them are gaining more traction. Like see, like the extended synthesis, and there's data with like convergence. So like things like very far apart, if you accept like an evolutionary story, like say like mice in Australia and mice in Europe, they're separated by like millions of years, but then they have a lot of the same features, which is really surprising if evolution is just purely random, which seems like to suggest that there is some sort of like goal orientation in evolution. And like, you don't have to be a Christian to acknowledge this. So I'd say that like IP is a really good video talking about how evolution is evidence of design. And then there's got to be also like certain law-like structures in the first place that allow evolution to take off. Like assuming that we have evolution. Well, first we have this problem of convergence. Like why are things that are separated by these millions of years so similar? And then we have this problem of you need like potentially these law-like structures to allow for evolution. Like, so like, I don't see how like given atheism, it's just given that there's going to be an environment that allows for evolution to occur. Like it seems like you're going to have to potentially have some design that allows for an evolutionary process, which should be more expected on theism than atheism. So in that sense, like perhaps even evolution could be evidence for theism. Once again, check out my interview with Zachary Adern if you want to explore more about this. Finally, I just want to say like, what evolutionary model is true is highly contested. So like I have a quote here from the extended synthesis model of evolution, and it's going to talk here. It's just going to talk about like what this view is. And this is a more modern view of evolutionary theory. And it says this, it says it makes a couple of claims about their theory. Novel phenotypic variants will frequently be directional and functional. So in this extended synthesis model of evolution, it's not just purely random. There's direction and function to the evolutionary story, which seems to go against the idea of Darwin just trumping idea, because there is some direction in the evolutionary theory, which, you know, could be some evidence for theism potentially. Furthermore, repeated evolution in isolated populations may be due to convergent selection and or developmental bias. So once again, we're talking about like mice in different parts of the world, are all kinds of different things. You can see my interview with Zachary Adern. We talked about convergence and evolution. Like there are lots of things that are seemingly suspicious when you think about evolutionary theory and saying that like it just trumps intelligent design, because it seems like the two aren't necessarily like mutually exclusive options. So that's all I'm saying. And if you ask me about evolution, like I'm personally agnostic. I mean, I don't believe the young Earth is true. So then, like, how does that work? Well, I don't know. Some sort of old Earth model is what I would believe in. I don't know. Hoping to do a review actually of Dr. Craig's book on the historical atom soon, which would be really exciting. So was the watchmaker blind, or was she one-eyed? This is a paper by Ramen Noble and Dennis Noble. You can check it out. It was published in 2017 and just talks about the same question. I'm just have a little blurb here that I'm just going to talk about here, and then we'll kind of move on to the last little bit. So here's what they say. The question of whether evolution is blind is usually presented as a choice between no goals at all, the blind watchmaker, and long-term goals which would be external to the organism, for example, in the form of a special creation or intelligent design. These arguments, either way, do not address the question, though, whether there are short-term goals, which within rather than external to organisms. Organisms and their interacting populations have evolved mechanisms by which they can harness blind stochasticity, hope I pronounced that word right, and so generate rapid functional responses to environmental changes. They can achieve this by reorganizing their genomes and/or regulatory networks. Epigenetic as well as DNA changes are involved. Evolution may have no foresight, but is at least partially directed by the organisms themselves and by these populations of which they form part. So all this to say, like, once again, it is very contested to say that evolution is a purely random thing which goes away with design. There's a lot of lines of evidence that seem to, at least suggest that there may be some directionality, intentionality in the evolutionary story. So it's possible. And this is something that's worth exploring. And I don't like to make these really big, judgments. So, sometimes, and I'm guilty of this. Theists will be like, well, I've been planning to just completely destroy the logical problem of evil for all of time. And it's like, nah, probably not. There's other forms of the logical problem of evil which still have some potential. So just saying, you can't just make this giant pronouncement based off of one idea. So theists are guilty of this too. So I would just be in the same way, hopefully when an atheist might be when a theist is planning to just destroy the problem of evil, we can be when someone says that Darwin just destroyed intelligent design. There's a lot left to be explored. So yeah, let's get into this last clip on divine hiddenness, and we will call it a day.
A contemporary of Paley, Percy Shelley, expressed frustration at just how poor the arguments for a god are in his essay titled A Refutation of Deism, which, for the record, is a phenomenal read. And I'll end this chapter by sharing just a few of his fine words. If God wishes to be known, cherished, thanked, why does he not show himself under his favourable features to all these intelligent beings by whom he wishes to be loved and adored? Why not manifest himself to the whole world in an unequivocal manner, much more capable of convincing us than these private revelations, which seem to accuse the divinity of an annoying partiality for some of his creatures? Would it not have been more in conformity with the views of a God so jealous of his glory and so well intentioned for mankind to write, in a manner not subject to dispute, his name, his attributes, his permanent wishes in ineffable characters equally understood to all the inhabitants of the earth? No one would then be able to doubt the existence of God, of his clear will, of his visible intentions. Under the eyes of this so terrible God, no one would have the audacity to violate his commands. No mortal would dare risk attracting his anger. Finally, no man would have the effrontery to impose on his name or interpret his will according to his own fantasy.
Okay, so this is really interesting. And this is one of the big reasons I chose this video to do a response to, and I thought it'd be edifying is, so Steve's presenting a form of the problem of divine hiddenness here. And what I found super interesting about this video is he talks about how it seems like God is pretty hidden and far removed from the world. And if you're watching this via YouTube, you can see the graphics here are, he starts in Austria, maybe somewhere in Central Europe, and he zooms out. Eventually you get the whole cosmos. And I just, every time I look at that, I'm like, yeah, this thing's amazing. How can you say that it's all necessary or something like that? Or it's just part of a multiverse. It seems like this is something beautiful, which seems to point to God. So that's at least my aesthetic impulse when looking at this kind of thing. So I just thought that was really interesting. But let's get into some of the other stuff. So Steve's presenting an argument from divine hiddenness. I think it's ironic how he shows the beautiful cosmos in the video, because it seems to me this is something that cries out for an explanation of why do we have all these planets and stars? Are you just going to say it's all necessary? It seems like positing God as a necessary being would be a lot simpler view than positing all of space-time. I'm not saying that Steve does this. It's just that's one of the things that I might be suggesting. So I don't think this is, I wasn't exactly sure what Steve is doing here. I don't think this shows that the arguments for God are bad. I don't know if that was Steve's intention or not. It just shows that divine hiddenness is a problem. So Steve talks about his favorite argument in the last section, and then why he thinks it fails, and then he gets into this divine hiddenness stuff, which may be maybe Steve's kind of decisive reason to not believe in God, or the most powerful to his mind. So I don't know. So let's talk about the Shelley quote, because I think this is super interesting, because I think Shelley is right in a sense. We don't serve a God that just wants us to bow down and kiss his feet. Yeah, we just don't want, that's not the nature of God, the character of God. And you can see that even in the scriptures. But God wants a being who wants us to want him. He wants us to pursue him, wants us to have a relationship with him. And God's hiddenness allows for these things. So we aren't just stuck, forced to believe in God, but we can just kind of explore and do things and figure it out. And yeah, so Yeah, I think God's hiddenness is allowed for good, such as God allowing us to participate in his work. So think about like the project of like science or philosophy. Like people are doing and studying a lot of serious questions right now. Imagine if we had these serious questions and then God was just always there in terms of like you just like press a button and there's the answer to your question. Well, then like what's the point of doing science or doing philosophy if you can just press the button and just get your answers and you're like, oh shoot. Like it seems like if like God wasn't at least to some degree hidden, like there'd be no point in making like scientific or moral progress or working together to do these things because we could just get it like an easy fix out of it. So there's that. I also think that like if we have a God who gave us literally anything we needed, we're not going to need each other. So like humans depend on each other for cooperation, for survival. We're a social species. We need to work with each other to have food or water or comfort. And if God just literally like was like, oh, his food tank is running low, let me just drop some bread out of the sky every single time. Like, then what's the point of humans even working together? And it seems like human cooperation is a very great good. So God's hiddenness allows for goods like that. And I'm not saying again here that God doesn't like ever do these things because I mean like I'm a Christian. I believe like the Israelites wandering the desert and getting manna, but it's like God doesn't always have to do that. And I think there's a lot of reasons why God a lot of the times has us do things ourselves. Yeah. And then there's a final thing that I'll say here, and it's like, would you rather be dropped on the top of the mountain or make the climb yourself? So sure, like you could take Steve's view here and maybe be like, okay, well, why wouldn't God show himself? Like, why wouldn't he just like put me in heaven and like, I can just be good and we can just go and have fun the rest of all eternity. And I'm kind of like, well, I think it's better to make the climb up to the mountain to know God more fully than just be dropped on top of it. And I talked about this a little bit with my dialogue with Randall Rouser on biblical ambiguity. So you can check that out. That was a few weeks ago. So yeah, I think that's the end of this video today. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, I wish you guys the best. Oscar says, there's a question here from Oscar. Says, my botherings with the God hypothesis presented is compatible with seemingly everything we see. Evolution works. No evolution also works. It's like make a prediction already. Well, I think that like everything, like literally any view is compatible with anything. So I don't really think this is a strike against theism because I think like this is why you have like talking with Emerson last night, this is why you have like materialists that like, will deny the existence of consciousness because it's just incompatible with their views. Like any view can account for all the data. It's just about what is the simplest and explains the most. So I don't really see this as a problem necessarily for just theism, like atheism. Any view can suffer with these things. Different views like evolutionary theory and whatnot. Jono says, oh, what's up, Jono? Do you think that teleology in biology Steve is talking about relates to ethics? The Catholic natural law tradition. I don't think so. Because you're just talking about the watchmaker analogy and like this having like this super complex system. And it's like, well, what best explains this? Well, a God. Then we have evolutionary theory, which kind of gets that out of the way. So I don't think it's really doing with natural law. But I mean, I could be wrong. I'm definitely not perfect. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. It's been so much fun. Very short stream. I need to go to school and do that stuff. So yeah, so much fun. No, I actually love school, so it's fun. But yeah, I wish you guys the best. Thank you so much for joining, to Jono and Oscar and Wesley and everyone else. Wish you the best. And if you always have questions, feel free to reach out to me through like email or private message or something. Always love to talk with you. May not be probably gonna be a little bit till I get back to you because I'm ridiculously busy right now. But I'd love to talk. And Steve, if you ever listen to this, you're amazing. Love your stuff. And I hope you found this edifying and kind of like building bridges and kind of like exploring ideas. And yeah, just hope it helps you in seeking truth. So wish you guys the best and God bless. We'll see you.